Good day, everyone. Thank you very much for attending the South-South Knowledge Sharing on Air Quality and Carbon Neutrality Regional Knowledge Sharing event on air quality and climate benefits of energy policies. I'm Everlyn Tamayo. I'm the Air Quality and Climate Change Science Lead of Cleaner Asia, and I will be your host for today. We are very glad to welcome you all today to a wonderful learning experience with our esteemed colleagues working on addressing all these issues, especially on the energy sector to address air pollution and climate change. To officially open the session, let's welcome to the virtual podium Dr. Joonho Hwang, Director of the Energy Division, Central and West Asia Department of the Asian Development Bank. He has a doctorate in civil engineering and has over 23 years of work experience in the field. Dr. Hwang will officially open the session and share the ADB's key actions in addressing air quality and climate change, especially from the energy sector. Let's all welcome Dr. Hwang on the floor.
Good afternoon, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure for me to open this knowledge sharing event on air quality and climate benefit of energy policies. This is the fourth and final event being organized under the project on South-South knowledge sharing on air quality and carbon neutrality that is arranged by the Environmental Thematic Group under the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department of ADB. Environment pollution causes about 9 million deaths every year globally. And of that, air pollution alone causes about 7 million deaths. In addition to causing health impacts and death, air pollution also exacerbates climate change, harms biodiversity, and reduces crop production by about 30%, threatening the food security. In addition, air pollution is responsible for losses worth more than $8 trillion in annual healthcare costs. Asian cities and countries always dominate the top 10 most polluted cities or countries in the world. And studies predict that there will be a reduction of 1 to 2.5% of GDP across different Asian economies by 2060. If the current pollution trends continue. Development activities under various sectors, such as transport, energy, agriculture, and urban and industries, lead to air pollutions. And today's focus is on air quality management under the energy policy. Air pollution and climate change are closely linked because most sources of air pollutants are also sources of greenhouse gases. For example, burning of fossil fuels in power plants generate carbon dioxide, which is a GHG, and nitrogen dioxide, which is an air pollutant, and black carbon, which is also GHG. So any action taken to address air pollution will also address climate change and vice versa. Obviously, the energy sector plays a significant role in addressing air pollution and climate change. The generation of energy, together with the residential energy use and industrial processes, are the key contributing sectors to global PM2.5 exposure and the corresponding health burden of an estimated 1.6 million annual premature death. In 2020, about 14 gigatons of CO2 emissions were emitted from the energy and heat production sector, with Asia accounting for about 10 gigaton or 60 to 70% of the global total. In 2021, a total of 55 gigaton of CO2 was emitted globally, and of this, 36 gigaton or two-thirds was emitted by energy combustion and industrial processes. The Paris Agreement and Climate Conferences of Parties, COPs, have been serving as a platform to drive ambition amongst governments to reduce carbon emissions and achieve carbon neutrality. In COP27 last year, several countries made significant commitment to move away from coal use and transition towards clean energy to achieve net zero emissions. Countries in Asia, such as the People's Republic of China, India, and Indonesia, pledged to retire coal-fired power plants, prevent the entry of new coal plants, and avoid funding of new fossil-based power projects. Ambitious goals on increasing the share of renewable energy sources in the energy mix have been announced, together with more stringent policies on monitoring and reducing emissions from the energy and industry sector. Internally within ADB, we have a number of targets and flagship events and programs that will result in reduction of GHGs and air pollution from the energy sector. These include the 100 billion climate finance target, the 2021 energy policy under which ADB committed to start financing new coal-based power projects, the energy transition mechanism, ETM, the ASEAN Clean Catalytic Financing Facility, and the ASEAN Clean Blue Skies Program, to name a few. We must take advantage of the global and national climate commitments, along with our own targets and commitment within ADB, and scale up financing and support for our developing member countries to reduce air pollution and GHG emissions from the energy sector. In closing, I would like to encourage our speakers and participants in today's session to focus the discussion on identifying actionable solutions and projects that will help our member countries to have cleaner air and achieve carbon neutrality. And with this, I wish everyone a fruitful event. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Hwang, for highlighting the urgent need to address air pollution and climate change and the significant role that the energy sector is playing in this. We are very glad to hear of the targets and the flagship programs of the ADB to reduce air pollution and climate change from the energy sector. Thank you so much, Director Hwang. We now begin with Attorney Glynda Bathan-Baterina, Deputy Executive Director of Clean Air Asia, to provide an overview of the South-South Knowledge Sharing on Air Quality and Carbon Neutrality Project and present the webinar agenda. Ms. Glynda, the virtual podium is yours.
Thank you very much, Ever. I am pleased to share with you some the objectives for the South-South knowledge sharing on air quality and carbon neutrality. So this project, which is supported by the Asian Development Bank, aims to facilitate the sharing of best practices on improving air quality and reducing carbon emissions. And we have, under this project, already implemented or conducted 3 knowledge sharing events, which are on the screen now. One which was on the G20 S20 high-level policy webinar when Indonesia was the chair or the president of G20. That was held last year, June 2022. And this year we held 2 other events. One was on agricultural burning in Asia, impacts and solutions last April, and a training course for Jakarta stakeholders on air quality monitoring best practices. And we, as part of this TA, we also have a knowledge product on key lessons from China's plans and actions on air pollution prevention and control. And for today, this knowledge event will provide an overview of the, just going to move my slide. Yes, an overview of the energy outlook in the region and the potential impacts of the energy transition to air quality, practical approaches on energy policy development and implementation will be discussed by regional experts with emphasis on the needs and considerations to ensure success and sustainability of solutions. And to give you an overview of the interesting discussions we have today, I have here a slide with all of our esteemed speakers. We will be hearing about the energy outlook for the ASEAN region, the guidance framework towards clean air and clean energy in Asia, air quality benefits of energy efficiency, key indicators and policies on air quality, carbon emissions and energy in Asia, recommendations and lessons learned on the energy transition of Southeast Asian countries, and ADB's energy transition mechanism. We will have time for a question and answer with our esteemed speakers in between sessions. So I hope everyone really takes advantage of this opportunity to engage with our speakers. I hand over back to you, Ever.
Thank you very much, Ms. Glynda. That was a very helpful overview of the KSE happening today. And to give us the energy outlook for the ASEAN and how to navigate the energy transition in the region, we have Mr. Zulfikar Yurnaidi to share a presentation on this. Mr. Yurnaidi is the Manager of Energy Modeling and Policy Planning at the ASEAN Center for Energy. He conducts research and cooperation activities in the field of renewable energy, energy efficiency, and climate change. Mr. Yurnaidi, turning over to you.
Yes, good afternoon. I hope my video and also my audio is audible. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. I assume the screen will be coming from your side. So yeah, if you can help in sharing the slides, please. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. So yeah, again, thank you very much for having me representing the ASEAN Center for Energy to be the presenter in today's event, the South-South Knowledge Sharing on Air Quality and Carbon Neutrality, Air Quality and Climate Benefits of Energy Policy. So I think for today, please allow me to share with you a little bit about the thoughts and also insights that we have from our flagship study in the ASEAN, the 7 ASEAN Energy Outlook, titled Navigating a Secure Energy Transition in ASEAN. Okay, let me allow me to start with a little bit of highlights of the energy sectors, especially in the year of 2022. This is based on our annual report, which is the 2022 ASEAN Energy Recap, which is based on our energy clipping news. So what we see in the year of 2022, we divided the trends into like 4 sectors. In terms of the supply, the oil and gas, what happened last year can only be say it's a huge fluctuations, volatility of the energy price and also energy supply. This happens because the double crunch of energy coming from the sudden growth of energy demand coming from the recovery from the pandemic, but at the other hand, we also have a tight supplies due to the conflict in Ukraine and Russia, and it continues even like this year, as we know that there are a lot of discussions about the inflations, etc., that make the reliability and also resiliency of energy being the centerpiece of the energy sector for the last year and so. But on the other hand, we also see a movement towards the clean energy transitions. What we are seeing in the regions are many utilities, be it in electricity utility and also oil and gas utility, started to explore diversify their business into a clean energy landscape, and these include installation of solar, hydro, geothermal, but also on the energy efficiency and also others. Utilities such as PLN also announced the plan to having a carbon neutrality, which is in line with the national policy. So I think we see the trends coming into a more clean energy as part of the energy security and resiliency. In terms of electricity, the price have been changing quite a lot last year. And again, this is an impact of the fluctuations of energy source and supply. But we also see the adaptations of digital technology, more connectivity between regions in ASEAN are something that we can see as a sustainable pathways towards energy transition, especially from the power sector. In terms of the policy, renewable energy, we see that there are many countries are putting new policies on this. Just to highlight a few, I think few weeks ago, Malaysia just announced their new targets of renewable energy power sector reaching 70%. They also lift the ban of the export of renewable energy, and this is a boon towards a higher level of power interconnection. As we know, last year also, actually like a few days ago, we had the 1-year celebrations of the first multilateral trade in the region involving 4 countries, the LTMS, the Laos, Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore line, 100 megawatts. We had just now a year anniversary just a few days ago. And I think we also have it, they are currently discussing on having it upgraded along with various initiatives towards the ASEAN power grid in the region. So I think in terms of renewable energy, we believe this new trend will also impact a higher penetration of renewable energy in the grid, which we believe the installations of new infrastructure such as grid will be very important for this. In terms of energy efficiencies and EVs, especially, we noted that there are many announcements on this, including in Indonesia, of which we had like regulations that announced that public transport of government officials transport will be based on EVs. Last month in the 41st summit of ASEAN in Labuan Bajo, there was also an announcement of declarations of EV infrastructure development of the EV ecosystem in the region. So I think there are a lot of new policies, not only from last year, but also continuing this year, of the regions attempting to improve the resiliency and sustainability of the energy amidst an issue of energy security. So it's a little bit thrown back, but please allow me also to share with you what are the strategies, what are the blueprints that we have in the regions. So the regional energy corporations are guided by this policy that we call the APAI, ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperations. It amounts of 7 program areas in order to achieve regional energy security, accessibility, affordability, and sustainability. I talk quite a lot about the ASEAN Power Grid, the LTMS. Indonesia, maybe I need to add that as part of its chairmanship this year, are aiming to initiate yet another power integration project, which is the BIMP, Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, and also the Philippines. ASEAN Center for Energy, or ACE, in collaboration with USTDA, currently supporting a feasibility study of 2 interconnection. First is from Malaysia to Peninsular Malaysia to Sumatra Island of Indonesia. Another one is within the Kalimantan, connecting between Indonesia and also Sabah. Hopefully in contributions towards this new BIMP power integration project. The Trans-ASEAN Gas Pipeline mainly discuss about oil and gas. Basically, we aim to improve our resiliency towards the creation of a common gas market for ASEAN. We also cannot forget the coal, clean coal technology. I think many countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Philippines, still depend on coal, especially in its power and also industry sector. So how we can put this into the framework of energy transitions. So that is the role of clean coal technology, and also carbon capture, storage, utilization are something that we discuss a lot within this program area. And of course, we cannot forget energy efficiency and renewable energy, 2 program areas that actually have a quantitative targets, which is to increase the renewable energy share, 23% in primary energy supply, 35% in installed power capacity by 2025, yet another 2 years to go, and also to reduce energy intensity by 32% from the 2005 level, also up until 2025. And we also noted that we have a nuclear over there, but that's something that currently being discussed, although there is no nuclear plant currently, but we envision that along the next few decades, I think 1 or 2 countries in the region might have nuclear in their energy mix. Continuing again on the discussions of energy transitions and how it might play out in the future, the 7 ASEAN Energy Outlook, or the AO7, conducted play around with 7 scenarios. These include baseline scenarios, the national target scenarios, or the ATS, the regional target scenario, or the APS, based on the UPHIKE, and also the LCO, or the least cost optimization scenario. I think the first highlight that I want to show is that the energy is going to grow. Many countries in the regions are developing countries, with around 4 times GDP growth being projected from the year 2020 until 2050. So accordingly, the energy demand and supply is also increasing. But I cannot show how much important is the energy efficiency other than this, because with proper energy efficiency programs, we can reduce this primary energy required from 4 times growth until only 2.7 or 2.5 times in the APS LCO scenarios. And this is also important because we noted that the region are currently a net importer of oil, so there is an issue of energy security here. On the other hand, it might become a natural gas importer as early as 2025, and even like net coal importer if the region continue with its baseline scenario, which reflects a lot of usage of fossil fuels in power sectors and also industry sectors. And for the power generations only, we also noted that the change will be coming. And it's going to the transition into cleaner energy forms. And this, I think, should include not only the solar and wind, but also on the hydropowers, on the geothermal, bioenergy, and also maybe wind energy and solar as part of the system. But this will incur a huge investment. Our study noted that value of 700 until 1,000 billion US dollar might be required for the next 3 decades. And this is nothing that our scenario does not yet reach towards a 1.5 degree scenario target. And I just want to note that our other report, together with the IRENA on the second RE outlook, noted that a 1.5 degree scenario might incur a cost of up to 3 trillion US dollar for power sector only, and up to 6 to 8 trillion US dollar for the whole system, including bioenergy, EVs, those infrastructures, and also others. So again, part of those efforts are the interconnections. We noted in our scenario that these new interconnections are something that are preferred, cost effective, and this is something that we are currently working together with the ASEAN member states to push forward. From the demand side, the issue of renewable energy and also maybe clean air in the regions are not only talking about coal, but also about the huge utilization of fossil fuel in industry and transport. Industry does a lot of coal, and transport, of course, oil is still the dominant fuel currently, and this is also something that we need to work on. Our scenario shown that the oil product remains the largest to be consumed, and although the share might be reduced up to 38% when we have cleaner transportations coming into our system. Why we are doing outlook, this is of course related with the projections of our targets. With the same trends currently, I think in 2021, the latest data that we have, we observed a good progress in both RE and EE, but it's not yet enough. It's still within the line of our ATS, national target scenario, meaning we might see a gap into our regional target. Like for example, our EI reduction target, we might see 2.8 percentage point gap. Our renewable energy in primary energy supply target, we might see 1.5% gap. So they are something that we really need to work on in the regions. And of course, energy are something that are related with other sectors, and this include emissions, GHG, and also the air quality emissions, such as the PM 2.5 and also others. But what we try to analyze here are that the emission will be reduced with the efforts on the renewable energy and energy efficiency, but we still see there are some emissions coming, even in 2050, if we do not expand our transformations beyond the regional targets. We also noted that the shifting of transport sectors to biofuel, in addition to the EV, might require land utilizations, which amount to up to 10 million hectare in 2050 in our baseline scenario. But we also noted that this is around 2.5% of the land mass of the ASEAN member states. On the demand side, I think there are many scenarios coming in here. And then we see that the clean cooking, efficient schooling, and also others are the efforts that we are currently working on in the regions in order to reduce the utilizations of fossil fuels, and with that, of course, reduce the emissions. On the supply side, I cannot stress again enough the importance of the infrastructures in terms of the grid, flexibility, grid interconnections, upgrading of the current system into a smart grid, digitalization of power, but also the importance of having a base load generation such as hydropower, geothermal, and also bioenergy. Maybe just to sum it up, a bit of key insights from the AO7. What we noted is that our progress in terms of installed capacity is quite in line with our aspirational target. We envision that by 2025, we have around 37% of renewable energy installed power capacity, but we noted that it should go beyond capacity and translate it into higher generations, meaning a base generations need to be there. Penetrations of reliable renewable energy such as solar and wind need to be coupled with the storage and or upgrading of the grid, so that the high progress that we have in Vietnam can actually be translated into electricity generations. And of course, interconnections, grid upgrading are very important. And last but not least, of course, the issue of geopolitics, supply chains, materials availability are something that we need to look at. In the end-use sector, beyond energy efficiency, which should be there first and foremost, we also need to pursue electrifications in all sectors, in EVs, in transport, in the cooking, and as much as possible in industry sector, but also to shift on the renewables of end use, such as bioenergy through biofuel, biomass co-firing, solar heating, and also others. Last but not least, we would like to say that a energy transition needs to be secure and also resilient, meaning that we also need to think about the current system that we have. And this also, of course, include on the financing. So I think several initiatives such as the ETM, the JETP are something that are in line with this, and hopefully we can see a more fruitful actual projects and implementations that can support the ASEAN as a region to have an energy transition that are secure but also resilient. Maybe last but not least, just to highlight some of the priorities of Indonesia as the ASEAN chair, especially in the energy sector. I mentioned about the power interconnection. We're also working on the long-term RE roadmap for the regions, and several best practices studies ranging from the topics of bioenergy, remote areas, clean energy, smart and digital energy management, but also CCUS, electric vehicle, and most importantly, financing of the energy transitions. So I think I'll stop there. You can visit our website for more information about our studies and also our insights. And yeah, I will be more than happy to receive questions. Thank you.
Many thanks, Mr. Yurnaidi, for that very wonderful presentation. It's so helpful to have an understanding on how we can navigate secure and resilient energy transition in the ASEAN, which can also be applicable in other countries in the region, with emphasis on looking at both the power and the supply side, as well as the end-use sector. So thank you for the presentation. Ms. Dang Espita Casanova, our program manager, will now moderate the question and answer for Mr. Yurnaidi. Dang?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Yurnaidi. And I think our participants have indicated in the Q&A box some of the questions that they have after your very comprehensive presentation. I guess this is also a good start to this afternoon's very rich information sharing, where we, of course, would take a look at energy transition from different angles and, of course, highlight as well on the air quality benefits that could be gleaned from this transition. So I guess the first question that we'd like to pose would be in this age, and of course, while of course social inclusion and equality is very much highlighted in our systems today, I think the question relates to how energy access, or what perhaps the success or the key considerations are to ensure energy access and affordability during the ASEAN region. So would you like to answer that live, Mr. Yurnaidi?
Yeah, so I think I also looking at the chat, and maybe the first two questions are quite similar, and
yeah.
So basically, as I mentioned in the APAIC, we not only focus on security and also sustainability, we also try to focus on accessibility and also affordability. And of course, this will relate with the resilience and also secure energy transition that I mentioned, meaning that when we have energy transitions, we also need to think about the current system that we have, like the coal power plant, the fossil fuel, how we can proceed with the energy transition that does not leave this industry as the victim of energy transitions. That's the first. Second, of course, this also relates with the affordability. There are many the several member states are putting a strong emphasis on the pricings of electricity and also oil and gas through subsidy. So I think the policies that try to push towards energy transition need to think about this as well. And this is something that we always discuss with our member states on what would be the economic impact of the various options of energy transition. There is no like clear-cut answers that we have here, but what I want to say is that it's something that we put as one of the pillars of energy transition in the region. And among many studies, capacity buildings, consultancy that we do with the ASEAN member states, we always put the emphasis of affordability and energy access, not only on the like its options, but also more on a more comprehensive life cycle analysis of each technology. So I think I'll stop there for that. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Yurnaidi. I think that also circles to the question on, of course, considering the key technology solutions that can be adopted. And as you've said, technology co-innovation would then again play a key role, making sure that these technologies are, of course, apt to the context of the member states, and at the same time would consider affordability and sustainability as well. So thank you for responding to that. And I guess in relation to this and to your earlier sharing, and it was very comprehensive in your presentation that indeed there have been, or there are several policy frameworks that have been enacted or enforced in the region. So I guess like from an implementation point of view, I would ask whether what would you think are the success factors that policymakers and enforcers should keep in mind, making sure that, of course, as we transition into a new mix or a new scenarios for energy, what should they keep in mind for this to be successful technically?
Yeah, I think all policies need to really think about, because policies usually coming from the government, public sector, but this also need to think about the private sectors that actually play a lot of roles in energy transition. Like for example, the Vietnamese solar boom that happened the last few years ago during early pandemic, it basically successful because there are a lot of supporting policies that were designed by the government policymakers to support private makers so they can enter the market swiftly. These include they don't have like the local content requirements, which might also there for Indonesia, among other countries. They also have a support in the land acquisitions. And of course, this is in addition to the very obvious incentive, which is the feed-in tariff, competitive feed-in tariff that they have at that point. So designing a policies that really think about the policy, I mean, the private sectors and also general public will be something that we really need to think about. And that's first, I think, and second also on how we can design a policy that is in the spirits of collaborative, how the policy can be designed like together, not only from the perspective of the policymaker, but also probably, for example, the financial institutes. Like, for example, what would be the, I'll take an example of interconnection. Interconnection is a big projects. There are many policies out there, but we only recently see a lot of momentum currently coming from the LTMS. And this is something that we really see as a very success for what we have in the region. But with that small success of study cases, we are currently like receiving many discussions with ADB, with UNSCAP. All institutions are really want to get into the APG right now. So again, producing the success cases that can really attract collaborations are something that we really need to design. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yurnaidi. And indeed, I guess in Everlyn's presentation later, we'd also emphasize on making this good use cases available for policymakers and decision makers across the region to ensure replicability and, of course, to harness lessons from those stories as well. So thank you for highlighting that. And I'd like to end this part of the question and answer because Mr. Yurnaidi needs to leave for another engagement. But we'd like to, of course, thank you so much, sir, for imparting this very comprehensive presentation and for responding to some of our questions. So definitely, if and we would also ask our participants to perhaps send in their additional questions, and hopefully we can still engage with you through email if that's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'd like to transition for the next presentation. And I'd like to call on again Ms. Everlyn Tamayo, who is the Air Quality and Climate Change Science Lead of Clean Air Asia. And just a background is she also keeps track of regional trends and developments relevant to air quality and climate change, including the identification of emerging new areas of focus for Cleaner Asia's impact initiatives, which of course currently includes clean air and clean energy. So Ever, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dang, for the introduction. And again, good afternoon to everyone. I am presenting on behalf of the whole Cleaner Asia team, but we're actually a whole team working on this. And this afternoon, I'm going to share to you about the guidance framework towards clean air and clean energy in Asia that we have developed with focus on reducing emissions from coal-fired power plants and heavy polluting industries. And as what we have discussed by the previous speakers, we highlight the need for urgent action. And in Cleaner Asia, our main focus is to reduce air pollution and mitigate climate change. And we do this by science-based policy guidance, capacity building towards stakeholder action at different levels. And in this particular work, this is building on the numerous studies that have already established the crucial role that we need to act on in order to achieve our air pollution and climate goals. There's several literature that already highlights that the energy sector plays a key role because it is indeed the largest source of anthropogenic or human-driven air pollution in the world. And even the IEA emphasizes that improvements even in energy efficiency would already have significant benefits in terms of air quality in the context of economic, environmental, and health benefits. The IPCC highlights that if we really want to act on climate, we really have to address the energy sector. And in an ADB Institute working paper, they highlighted that when they studied data from Asian countries, there is very high prevalence of lung and respiratory diseases in countries with higher carbon dioxide emissions because they have higher fossil fuel consumption. Basically, it says that for every 1% increase in fossil fuel consumption, this accelerates by 1.38% lung and respiratory diseases. In 2020, Cleaner Asia has published the coal-fired power plant emission standards in South and Southeast Asian countries. So it was a policy analysis to look into the status of the coal-fired power plant sector in the sub-region. And of course, we also compiled studies which highlight the benefits to the air and health when we look into policies that really control emissions from the coal-fired power plant sector. There has been publications such as that of Koplitz et al. That you have 70,000 total excess deaths because of communities being exposed to emissions from the coal-based power plant sector, and that for every 1 kilowatt increase in coal capacity per person, the relative risk for lung cancer increases by a factor of 59%. So ultimately, when there are policies that is related to strengthening or making more strict emission standards, there would be benefits, especially in terms of health to the citizens. Now, in terms of action, so as mentioned, this is the report that we have published in 2020. And as a concrete action point, we developed what we call the guidance framework towards clean air and clean energy in Asia, herein referred to as the guidance framework throughout the rest of the presentation and the slides. And we developed this framework through the communities of practice as advised by the Experts Advisory Council, wherein the main goal is to provide direction to our government partners on concrete actions that can achieve clean air and clean energy by reducing emissions from the coal sector as well as other heavy polluting industries and the eventual transition to clean energy. So the unique aspect of this framework is that it already combines the key components, both relevant at the environment in terms of air pollution and emissions aspect with the energy components or energy sector. The vision is very much aligned with the overall vision of Clean Air Asia, wherein we see a world with clean air, blue skies, and a stabilized climate for people in the planet. In particular, we want to improve air quality and abate climate change while fostering economic growth. This is while we are increasing or elevating the quality of life of the people aligned with the 2030 SDGs. In addition to this, we want to accelerate the transition to cleaner energy and achieve targets of reduced CFP emissions by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2050. So this is also very much aligned with net zero goals. The diagram on the right just shows here that we need to balance all these aspects in order to achieve the envisioned sustainable future. In particular, the guidance framework, as mentioned, wants to provide and steer decision makers towards attainable steps in achieving clean air and clean energy in Asia, ideally aligned with the WHO air quality guideline values, net zero, and climate targets. So what we want to do is to strengthen the capacity of government partners in developing and implementing policies related to emissions control and energy transition. We highlight that it should be a data-driven approach that will inform policy and decision-making. And ultimately, we want governments to adopt an integrated strategy to achieve clean air and clean energy so that we maximize all co-benefits. The role of Cleaner Asia in this is providing an avenue for our partners to ensure that there is an opportunity to learn from each other. So this is what we call a co-learning approach, wherein they can share what has worked, what is not working, what information they can use in order to maximize learning on what is applicable at the local context. So Cleaner Asia, what we are doing here is the continuous assessment of policies, regulations, institutional frameworks related to CFPs and energy use and transition in the region, provide technical advice, and provide detailed frameworks towards policies that will reduce CFP emissions, and also leading to more efficient and sustainable energy development in use. So ultimately, through the COP, or the community of practice, we want to facilitate technical discussions. We want to have consultations, meetings, wherein the member countries can ask for advice from the experts, and as well as from the other government partners. So the main role of the Experts Advisory Council, as described, would be to provide feedback to the framework, provide guidance to our partner countries, and review pertinent documents, reports, and policy drafts. Now, a bit more specific on the guidance framework, what we'd like to do now is to give you an idea of the components. So what we want to emphasize here is that it's not a framework that is meant to provide a very definitive step for each of the governments, because we understand that each government would be in a different situation or would be undergoing different kinds of stages towards the goal. But what we are providing here is a framework that can serve as guidance. It's a guide that can let them or help them identify these are the components that we need to work on. Initially, we have put here short-term, medium, and long-term goals, but the components that we have identified here can be done or addressed or implemented in the time frame that is most applicable for the country. The overall goal is for us to reach clean air and clean energy, and this means sustainable future with reduced emissions from the coal sector and other heavy polluting industries. And we do this through emission controls and energy transition. So what are these components? Under short term, the first component that is very important and crucial is about data, planning, and prioritization. But what we want to also highlight here is that for the whole process, the community of practice plays an integral role because it will provide an avenue to strengthen the capacity of governments to learn from each other. So it's a co-learning approach. Now, the first component is on data-driven planning and prioritization of measures. So if I can just zoom in on this component, on this stage, we highlight that there should be the collection of data, the collection, processing, and analysis of data, focus on status, assessment, impacts. And we also look into all existing and planned policies related to air pollution, climate change, and energy, and also look at best practices on what's being done at the international stage. And we use all of these information towards the planning and prioritization of actions. This step, of course, covers that the targets are aligned with local and international commitments so that we are really considering health, air quality, climate, and economic benefits. So this is one of the key main components because as we have always mentioned, it's very difficult to have specific steps if we don't have specific information at the beginning. Now, we also highlight, however, that although it is a continuous process, having very elaborate data sets or the lack of it should not be a deterrent in prioritizing measures. So in line with that, the next key component would be the implementation of guidelines on best available techniques, data transparency, and interagency coordination. So let me just zoom in on this component. And in this component, what we want to highlight is that there should be implementation guidelines on how efficient systems, energy systems, and the power plants should be to ensure that there is reduced emissions. We also want to highlight that there should be clear guidelines on data transparency so that we really know what's happening in terms of emissions and the performance of the facilities. And very important is that there should be integrated action across agencies and sectors. what we usually observe is that there is working in silos in the context of issues related to the environment or air quality, and with regards to issues that are priorities of the ministries of energy. So as you can see here in this framework, we're trying to integrate the two different ministries or departments so that we achieve the integrated results. For the medium term, another important component that we are highlighting, is the implementation of stricter emission standards and the clean energy transition. So on this aspect, what we really want to ensure is that the emission standards are strictly enforced with commensurate penalties and emission charges, as well as the implementation of energy transition plans and roadmaps towards reduced coal or fossil fuel dependence. This is so we make sure that we are meeting local, national, and international emission reduction and sustainability goals. Another important component after this stage is that we ensure that there is maximization of the share of renewable energy in the energy mix while reducing coal consumption. Now, while we are in the energy transition period, we want to implement strategies which overall increase the share of RE in the energy mix. And for those that are still transitioning, we are also noting here that the use of alternative fuels can be explored. For example, biomass co-firing, if applicable, and this should be in combination with pollution control technologies. Another important aspect would be data transparency. So what we want to highlight here is that since we have guidelines on data transparency, use of best available techniques, and interagency coordination, so definitely the guidelines should be cascaded across agencies and sectors, which emphasizes also as well that there should be data transparency for the public. We highlight that this is a continuous process wherein the review guidelines and the information should feed back into the planning and prioritization of measures, because it should be a feedback mechanism wherein what we know would inform us with our next steps. Another important aspect is ensuring availability of ambient air quality and emissions data. This is also where we highlight that we can use air quality monitoring data as a metric of how the energy sector is actually reducing emissions in order for us to meet our long-term goals. So what we want to have is that air quality monitoring and emissions data are available for use by the public for continuous monitoring of the performance of the industry. Now here, in the long term, what we would expect to see is that there is eventual decommissioning of coal-fired power plants, and this is in line with net zero and carbon neutrality goals. Therefore, the construction of new coal-fired power plants are halted, while existing plants are decommissioned and renewable energy is used as main energy source. So ultimately, what we are also emphasizing here is that all throughout the process, there is monitoring and evaluation of policies. And at the end, what we want to see is that there is an assessment of impacts wherein we really look into the effectiveness of the guidelines and policies that are reflected in each of the components, to see if there is reduction in emissions from the coal-fired power plants through control measures, strict standards, stringent implementation of data collection with QA/QC. We look into, is there significant reduction in coal dependence, and is there improved ambient air quality and reduced environmental and health impacts from areas originally with a lot of coal-fired power plants, and ultimately achievement of local, national, and international goals. And as we emphasize, the components are also interconnected with one another. And the ultimate goal is that we hope that this guidance framework can be very helpful to our government partners in identifying components that they need to act on in order to achieve clean air and clean energy in the region. So with that, thank you very much. I would be very keen to hear if you have questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ever. I think we have some time before the next presentation, but there's one question in the chat. I think this is from an interested, uh, maybe a representative from the country. So, how can participants actually, how can countries actually participate in the community of practice that you have mentioned earlier? And I guess this is indeed like an exchange platform of learnings, but yeah, what is the mechanism for countries to participate in the COP?
So thank you very much for the question. So definitely we have started with the community of practice in 2020. And since then we organize once a year. So it's an annual event where we hold the regional training, and it's actually open to all interested parties. So what we just do is to make sure that we send the details to the interested parties. Of course, you can get in touch with us if you want to participate in those knowledge exchanges. And usually we hold this during the first quarter of the year, but this year is also very important because it's the year where we also have the Better Air Quality Conference, or BAQ, that Cleaner Asia has been organizing since the start of the organization. It's happening in November. And eventually we will provide more detailed information about the conference, but you can also send an email to the addresses shown in the screen, and we will also put in the chat.
Thank you, Ever. And since this the community of practice is a continuing effort, guess there had also been like activities from the side of Cleaner Asia, which technically tracked or monitored the progress of the countries in response to our as they adapt the guidance framework. So could you share a bit more about how countries and representatives have been also like willing to share information on their progress vis-a-vis the guidance framework implementation?
So thank you for that question. So for the past 3 events that we've had, so with the annual events that I've talked about a while ago, what we do during the technical meetings is that aside from experts sharing best practices in their countries, we actually give time for the countries to share what's happening in their respective governments. So we had greater focus in the past years with Vietnam, Indonesia, and Philippines, given the very high dependence on coal and coal-fired based energy production. And what usually happens in the process is that for every component, they share the progress from the previous year. What we usually observe here is that it's a good opportunity for them to share the progress, because it also, since the components involve topics that are not just limited to the environment ministry, it actually pushes coordination between agencies, because they tend to communicate and ask the other agencies, let's say the industry and the energy ministries, on what are the latest developments and policies. And then usually what happens is that they are the ones that already share, okay, from last year, this is what we've had, and then the next year, this is already the progress. We see this as an effective approach in such a way that it gives them space to choose which components they would like to highlight on. So it's not just one criteria, but it can be multiple criteria, the multiple components that we've seen, and they are the ones which elaborate on components that they have worked on, and then also provide targets. Okay, in the next COP meeting, these are the highlights that we hope to have more updates on. So it's more of a verbal sharing, and then of course on the side of Cleaner Asia, we document this, and then basically we hope that of course other countries can also adopt the structure. Basically, we understand that it's a non-committal reporting, but we hope that because of the community of practice, the countries themselves are motivated to share. So that's what we are happy to share as well, that we encourage that kind of culture wherein they'd be happy to share progress.
Thank you, Ever. And maybe just to add to that, I think this very much also fits with what Mr. Yurnaidi shared earlier about policy coherence and of course coordination among the ministries. So maybe you can just confirm that of course not just the Ministry of Energy is invited to the community of practice, right?
Yeah, so definitely what we really want to do in the coming years is that, especially for this year, is that we really foster the integrative approach of energy and environment ministries to work together, since anyway, we all want the same goal. So we want Cleaner Asia to be, and the guidance framework to be a way for that collaborative and integrative approach.
Thank you. Thank you, Ever. And I guess that concludes the question and answer part for this part of the session.
Thank you so much, Dang, for facilitating the Q&A. And now we move on to another very interesting presentation. And as what a lot of us is very much familiar with, China has been very successful in linking policies on air quality, carbon emission, and energy generation and use. To share some lessons from PRC, may I invite our colleague, Dr. Wei Wan, Program Director of Cleaner Asia China Office. Wei leads the management and implementation of programs and projects of Cleaner Asia in China and supports the development of the China strategy, programs, and projects. Wei, welcome to the virtual podium.
Thank you, Evelyn, for the nice introduction. I'm trying to share the screen, and please let know if you can hear and see me clearly.
Okay, we can see and hear you clearly as well. Go ahead, Wei.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It is a great honor for me to join this event. Today, my presentation is mainly based on the key findings of Clean Asia's teamwork, the report themed on China's 10-year path toward cleaner air with an Asian perspective, which is a special issue of our China Air Report series, documenting the China's progress in air pollution control, as well as climate change mitigation in the past decade. We also hope this to cover more a broader perspective. So we give an overview of clean air and climate change key progress, not only made in China, but with more Asian countries also provides benchmarking with US, UK, Germany that have great achievements of clean air actions, as well as climate change mitigation in the past decades and still leading the way. This report covers 6 areas, including the key indicators of air quality, air pollution emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, energy sector, which is also the highlight of today's event. And also, we also take a look on the transport sector and key industry sectors. Today's talk will focus on the key indicators and policies on air quality, carbon emission, and energy in Asia, which is more related with today's theme. And we also would like to highlight the scope of this report. It includes the East, South, and the Southeast Asia, where Clean Asia have been actively working with local stakeholders to tackle air pollution and climate change together. This slide shows a most recent study released by HEI in last year. It shows the city data on the air quality, because cities are often hotspots for air pollution. As rapid urbanization increased the numbers of people breathing dangerously polluted air, city-level data can help inform targeted efforts to curb the urban air pollution and improve public health. If we look at the data of city level, PM2.5 exposure are highest in populous cities located in South Asia, East Asia, and many of them are in China, and also some in Southeast Asia, according to this database and map we can see. Obviously, air pollution is a common issue for all globally, but Asia needs to take stronger action because we are facing the greater challenge. In the year 2021, WHO upgraded global air quality guidelines. One of the most important change is the guideline level for PM 2.5 has been significantly tightened based on the scientific evidence in the past 15 years, reducing the recommended annual average mean of PM 2.5 from 10 microgram per cubic meters to 5. Based on the monitoring data from over 6,000 cities in more than 110 countries globally, almost all the global population is exposed to the air that fails to meet the new guidelines. The population-weighted annual average PM 2.5 concentration in South Asia, East Asia is at or high above the Interim Target 1, which is the most lenient guideline specified in the guidelines. So based on the comparison with the new guidelines, this figure has two storylines. The blue pillars here show the existing air quality standards of many Asian countries and European and US country. US. The yellow points show the actual air quality status that we all have. China's annual PM 2.5 standards is the same as the WHO AQG Interim 1, which is the most lenient one, as I mentioned. But China has implemented these standards quite effectively in the past decade. The monitoring data in cities showed annual average PM 2.5 concentration was now about 30 in 2021, lower than the standard requirements, 35 microgram per cubic meters. Beijing, one of the cities with most severe air pollution in the past years, in the past, decreased from the annual mean from almost 90 to 30 microgram per cubic meters. And that has already attained the standard since 2021, the year. Currently, air quality in nearly half of Asian countries does not meet the local standards. And for sure, we have different standards. Some Asian countries with relative strict standards still have quite poor air quality. Upgrading the standards itself and also continuous improve the air quality is needed to further protect the health of the public, especially for the vulnerable groups such as the elderly people, the pregnant women and children, which is quite crucial for many Asian countries, including China, because we are having the pollution that is aging in the future. Many countries also have already been fighting hardly for cleaner air in the past years. China is one of the made big change, as introduced by my colleague Eva. We can observe the relation between the GDP and PM 2.5 exposure level. China's GDP per capita has existed the $10,000, which we can see as a threshold. We crossed the turning point and achieved the decoupling of air pollution and economic development, energy consumption and urbanization showed in this slide. And this provides an example to many other neighboring countries and Asian developing countries with similar challenges and trying to balance the environment protection and economy. A win-win situation can be achieved. And here is the slide to share China's total emission of major air pollutants and emission chains. We can see that the emission per GDP have both dropped significantly over the last decade. In the past years, sulfur dioxide emission per unit of GDP dropped by almost 88%, and several Asian countries like the Republic of Korea, Malaysia, Singapore, and Thailand also decreased significantly over 40%. And we can we can see that we have already made quite remarkable progress in many countries to control the emission of the primary pollutants. So what has been done to bring a big change in a good way, in a positive way? We always would like to show this policy framework of China. In 2012, the revision of China's national ambient air quality standards was a milestone of China's air quality management. It was not only made a change of air quality, but also started the systematic upgrading of air quality management framework and policies in our country, such as enhanced capacity of air quality monitoring and identifying the sources of air pollution through the emission inventories and source apportionment, and also set comprehensive emission reduction measures in key sectors. And energy is one of the most important sector that we apply the measures and adopt strict standards that I will go further details in the later. And we also have many supporting measures to guarantee the implementation and compliance of the policies. For illustration, the air quality standards revision promoted a leapfrogging of monitoring stations in China. And China has gone from monitoring only three criteria pollutants to 6, and a number of monitoring stations in cities that have network about 3 times of before. This small picture in the right below part of this slide showing the state-of-art air quality monitoring and observation network in Beijing, Tianjin, and Hebei region. However, if we compare the density of the network in consideration of city area and population, the monitoring network still needs to be enhanced for most Asian cities, including mega cities in China like Beijing and Shanghai. Many cities have conducted source apportionment and studies, as I mentioned. They try to identify primary contributors for the PM 2.5 pollution in urban area. We also compiled the results from the government sources and published research studies that to see what would be the major issues. The average contribution of mobile source to PM 2.5 in major and cities is about 30%, meaning the transport sector is the major contributor. In mega cities, including Chinese mega cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and as well as Delhi and Jakarta, that the highest can be over 50%, the ratio. But it doesn't mean that the other sectors are not important. This is only the source apportionment in the urban areas. The other sectors like energy, and the open burning are also bringing air pollution issues in many Asian regions. Monitoring and source apportionment will help the policy makers to have science-based air quality management. But meanwhile, we should highlight that the effective measures are the key to make real emission reduction from multi-sources and achieve and be the drivers for air quality improvement. Here's a study published by Tsinghua University team. The measure-by-measure evaluation indicated that strengthening industrial emission standards, including the power plants and the emission-intensive industrial sectors, upgrades on the industrial boilers, and using cleaner energy, phasing out outdated industrial capacities, and promoting cleaner fuels in the residential sector were major effective measures according to the studies, and has made great achievement in reducing the PM concentration and also the health burdens. I will give some examples of how China has made the difference in those areas and where are we now comparing to other countries. I will firstly highlight the energy sector. The change is quite remarkable here. Emission control of air pollutants in China's power sector. which producing the energy, has developed rapidly. Under the ultra low emission policy requirements, the current emission limits of PM, sulfur dioxide and NOx are 10, 35, and 50 milligram per cubic meters respectively, which are the most stringent levels in the world, much lower than the EU standards. We can see the emission limits of sulfur dioxide and NOx are almost 20% and 1/3 of the EU stand respectively. In the situation, the transport emission standard and fuel quality are quite similar. We also have the most stringent standards among the countries. And both the steel and cement industries are also two key industries that working toward ultra low emission with the very tight emission requirements, and the energy use in those sectors are key to clean up the emission. All these efforts of key sectors are deeply related with energy use. In the last 30 years, most Asian countries have seen a rapidly increasing trend in energy consumption. Most countries' energy consumption growth slowed down after 2010. At present, China's total energy consumption is the highest still. While the country's energy consumption continues to grow, China's energy consumption structure has been improving and moving to a cleaner structure recently. As the latest coal consumption globally, we are the largest. China's coal consumption ratio in energy consumption structure has been a downward decreasing from over 60%, over 62% in 2010 to 57% percentage in 2019. However, if we look at the structure compared with those countries with cleaner structure in Europe and America, which gradually shift to a cleaner and more balanced energy structure, most Asian countries have a higher dependence on fossil fuel energy. Coal still dominates energy consumption and producing in China, Mongolia, and India. We have similar energy structure. Southeast Asia countries rely more on oil, with their oil consumption ratios falling between 28% to 86%. The proportion of coal production in Indonesia, Vietnam, and Philippines are gradually increasing. That we need to have a focus to maybe a focus in the future to work on the energy structure restructure. As the world moves toward carbon neutrality and net zero emission, many Asian countries have announced their decarbonization goals. It is important to emphasize that moving toward carbon neutrality will bring driving forces and co-benefits to clean air. However, about 1/3 of the world's energy consumption and half of the world's carbon dioxide emission comes from Asia, making the task of emission reduction for our Asian countries challenging. China has promised to achieve the carbon neutrality peak carbon dioxide emissions in about 30 years, much shorter period than many countries that have already taken or promised to take action. It will take great efforts to achieve this, and with the new China speed. As we can see from this slide, several developed countries have already achieved the carbon emission peak, while Asian developing countries, including China, are still climbing the hill. As a major contributor over the past 10 years, China has taken various climate change mitigation actions to control greenhouse gas emission, slowing down the growing speed of carbon emission. China is now gradually gradually moving from an intensive economy development model to a greener development model with carbon emission per unit of GDP decreasing by 1/3 in the past decade. Currently, power or energy sector and industry sector are the highest carbon emission sectors in China, accounting for nearly 30% of the country's total emission. The transport sector will be the key sectors to peak in the last and face more difficulties to achieve carbon neutrality. And this situation is also quite similar for several Asian countries, especially the emerging new economy. And China is also the world's largest country in terms of new car sales and ownership. And now China has become the world's largest EVs, accounting for half of the global market. And the transferring to EV will be a key pathway for the Asian countries to reduce the emission from transport sector and energy shifting. The promotion of EVs in many Asian countries is still in its early stage, but we already have started proposing development goals for EVs. The development of transport energy transformation has broad prospects, and in this area, I think there will be opportunities to make synergies through collaborations for sure among countries. And here are some key messages I would like to highlight at the end of this presentation. China has achieved rapid air quality improvement in the past decades through science-based management, comprehensive measures, and strict standards. For example, currently the end-of-pipe control measures are very strict. Further emission reduction need to be done through a shift to cleaner structure. And energy structure is a very important area to work with. And China's experience will be useful for other Asian countries facing with the similar challenges to combat the air pollution and climate change together. And we, Clean Asia, would like to keep the efforts to promote the experience sharing, cross-learning, and capacity building and transferring in Asia in collaboration with our partners. Very important one will be ADB. I would like to take this opportunity to express our gratitude to colleagues and experts that are providing valuable input to this report. Please also feel free to download our report to find further details of this presentation by scanning the QR code or contact us via email. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wei, for the presentation. It's very inspiring how the PRC has demonstrated that economic growth is not necessarily synonymous to increase in air pollution. And this can be done through, as you've mentioned, science-based management, comprehensive measures, strict standards, and ultimately, we hope that decarbonization will bring co-benefits to clean air, especially as other Asian countries also learn from the experience of the PRC. Thank you so much, Wei. We do have some questions in the Q&A box, but we can address them later before the end of the session. So now the Southeast Asia sub-region is also catching up and has stories to share about their energy transition journey. To share recommendations and lessons learned on energy transition of Southeast Asian countries, let's welcome Dr. Achmed Shahram Edianto, Senior Program Management Officer of the UNOPS Energy Transition Partnership. Dr. Edianto is primarily responsible for effective, transparent, and efficient coordination of the fund's programs with the ETP Secretariat in its countries of operation under the rules and regulations of UNOPS, and in accordance with the strategy approved by the ETP Steering Committee. Dr. Edianto, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Ever, for your kind introduction. First of all, I would like to say thank you for inviting me to this event, to Clean Air Asia and ADB. Maybe I would start with the introduction, a little bit about ETP and how we work in the region. But I think the previous speaker already mentioned that the transition towards clean energy has gained momentum across Southeast Asia region, with countries in the region scaling up their support to shift away from coal towards cleaner alternatives such as solar and wind. However, translating this momentum into actual progress presents significant challenges, particularly in the context of fast-growing economies such as Indonesia, Vietnam, and Philippines, where it's imperative to secure a sufficient and reliable supply of clean energy to support their development aspiration while advancing decarbonization goals. It is quite often, if we talk about energy transition, our discussion tend to narrowly focus on, like technical, financial, or a specific policy solution, where broader system level factors affecting transition that is required to facilitate the transition process is missing from the debate. So allow me to bring you in the next few minutes about EDP's experience working in the region to facilitating energy transition. Again, my name is Achmed Shahram Edianto. I'm the Senior Program Management Officer at Southeast Asia Energy Transition Partnership under UNOPS. Could you please help me to? Okay, thank you. So just a brief introduction of what is Southeast Asia Energy Transition Partnership, or we call it ETP. ETP is a multi-donor partnership formed by governmental and philanthropic partners to accelerate sustainable energy transition in Southeast Asia in line with Paris Agreement and sustainable developments. As you can see in my previous slides, there are some governments who support ETP Secretariat, such as government from Germany, UK, France, and Canada, as well as philanthropies like Sweden Investment Fund, IKEA Foundation, Windward, Sequoia, etc. We start as a 5-year program, started in 2020 to 2025 at that time, but the program itself rapidly growing into 15 years program now. So we plan to extend our program until 2035. We combine the best of the public and private sector with the UN to help mobilize and coordinate technical and financial resources to build the foundation for renewable energy efficiency, as well as sustainable resilient infrastructure. We work in 3 different countries, Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam. And we also have a regional work across Southeast Asia, which I will explain later in my next slides. Thank you. So as you can see, this is the governance of the Energy Transition Partnership, which consists of the steering committee, secretariat, and advisory panel. As I mentioned earlier, we have the steering committee, which consists of the donors, representatives from the government, and then the philanthropies. Myself and the team of Energy Transition Partnership is part of the secretariat who run this program in daily basis. In doing our work, ETP also has supported by the advisory panel, which consists of representatives from the government, academia, NGOs, as well as other experts in the energy transition. Next, please. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Next slide. Okay.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So again, this is just to brief explain about the way we work. So basically, ETP aims to empower its partner countries towards an energy system that ensure environmental sustainability, economic growth, and energy security. And the way we achieve this goal, ETP will mobilize and coordinate the necessary technical and financial resources to create enabling environment and address impediment for the renewable energy efficiency, as well as sustainable infrastructure in the region. EDP also aims to deliver joint action, improve coordination and dialogue to accelerate the energy transition through our 4 pillars, which is the first one from the left to the right, is aligning policy with climate commitments, the risking renewable energy and energy efficiency, expanding sustainable and resilient infrastructure or smart grid, and the last one is knowledge and capacity development under the umbrella of energy transition. Next, please. So this is just to give you some highlight from our work back in 2021. As I mentioned earlier, we have 4 pillars. These 4 pillars was initiated to address 2 big impediments that we found in our mapping before we start our program. The first one is remove policy and financial barriers, while the second one is remove physical barriers and knowledge gaps. I think there was a good example from the previous speaker, Dr. Zul from ASEAN Center for Energy, that mentioned about the case of Vietnam solar boom, which quite similar, not really 100% similar to what happened in Indonesia, but how policy can address this kind of accelerating renewable energy progress in a country. But at the same time, we all know that after around 3 years, a very successful story on the solar development in Vietnam, there's an issue on the grid capacity, which become another barrier for the renewable energy to be accelerated, to continue accelerated in the future. So in that case, we also concerned to remove the physical barriers, which is concerning to how the existing grids of these countries can be sufficient enough to absorb more renewable energy, especially variable renewable energy. And I will explain further in the next slides. Next, please. So as we all know, there are a lot of things happened last year, as we heard from the previous speaker as well, from 3 countries, Indonesia, Vietnam, and Philippines. Again, the government has made a really ambitious commitment to comply with a climate target. For example, in Indonesia, before the JETP has announced in 2022, the government through the state-owned electricity company, PLN, announced the first ever, what they call the greenest electricity supply business plan, or we call it RUPTL, by prioritizing the additional renewable energy electricity up to 52% compared to 34% of coal-fired power plants, while compared to the previous RUPTL, usually the electricity supply was heavily dependent on coal. And then following that year, in September 2022, even before the Just Energy Transition Partnership announcement, the government also stipulated the Presidential Regulation 112/2022, which is again the first time ever the government mentioned that the country has to establish the roadmap for early retirement of coal-fired power plant. And then again, as we know that together with the G20 event last year, the JETP was announced. And one of the requirements for Indonesia to receive $20 billion is to reach the peak emission of the power sector of 290 million ton CO2 by 2030. And at the same time, increasing the share of renewable energy up to 34%. And similar case to Vietnam, JETP, Just Energy Transition Partnership, was announced in December 2022, last year. And then from the current net zero planning peak of 240 million ton by 2035 with international support, it was down from 280 million ton CO2 before COP26. and it's towards reaching a peak of no more than 170 million tons CO2 emission from electricity generation by 2030. And it's also mentioned one of the requirement is the country's project pipeline of the CFPP coal-fired power plant that currently standing at plant capacity peak of 37 gigawatt. It should be reduced toward a peak of 30.2 gigawatt, which has a 7 gigawatt gap. And then for the Philippines, last year we have instituted a new government in 2022. Following that new government, the Philippines has a new renewable portfolio standard requirement from a minimum of 1% to 2.52% annual increment. And also the country has the first green energy auction that held in mid-2022 for a total 2 gigawatt of renewable capacity. And following on that, there is a new regulation for 100% foreign ownership of solar, wind, ocean, hydro facilities to accelerate this renewable energy deployment in the country. And then there is also a partnership in developing floating solar onshore and offshore wind, EV, as well as nuclear energy in the country. So again, this just key highlight that what happened in 2022, which also changed the dynamic of energy transition in the region, especially in these three countries. Next, please. So again, this is just repeating the previous slide, but this is the summary of the target of each country. So just let's give an example for Indonesia. This 2025 target is basically from the latest new energy policy, which is already outdated. It was stated that by 2025, the target of Indonesia is to reach 23% of renewable energy share in the total primary energy supply. And then again, by 2030, we refer to the JETI requirement and the new NDC, which is has a more ambitious target than the previous national energy plan. But again, the government currently try to address and align all of these commitments and plans into one new national energy policy that I will explain later on the next slides. At the same time, I think for Indonesia and Vietnam, the country also already announced their net zero emissions. Even in Indonesia, the previous announcement is to achieve net zero emission by 2060, but the government also think to it's possible with again international support, the country could achieve the net zero emission future earlier than 2060. Next, please. So here are some EDP's intervention in these three countries. So in short, I think we can say that for the Philippines and Indonesia, again, this is based on case-by-case basis, and it really depends on the government agency, our counterpart, how we address their requests, again, to solve the energy transition problems in the country. So our approach is quite a bottom-up approach. So we engage with relevant stakeholders from the government, IPP, association, civil society, and try to excuse me, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. So we're trying to ask their explanation on how to help them, or try to seek their advice on how ETP can help them to overcome the barriers on the energy transition. So one of the example, again, in Indonesia, the way we work with the grids to be able to absorb more variable renewable energy is to help our state-owned electricity company, which is PLN, to improve their grid so they can absorb more renewable energy. The reason why we support this kind of work is because first, we know that some of the technology in the country, it's already obsolete. And again, now the energy transition technology progress is not linear anymore, it's exponential. So it's really important for us to not only, again, addressing the policy barrier, but also the physical real barriers, which we can, provide a support that can help the country really absorb and accelerate the renewable energy. So apart from that, we also support the government to assess the financial implication of early retirement of coal. Why we have to do this kind of analysis, the reason was because the government at that time has a really high concern that retiring coal very early could hit the macroeconomic of the country, especially the income of the government in the macro level, as well as the community level in the micro level. So we developed an assessment, a study to help our counterparts, in this case, Ministry of Planning and Ministry of Energy, to see how big is the impact when we early retire coal-fired power plant and how it could affect the entire supply chain of coal-fired power plant, including coal mining, and then how this early retirement and the impact will affect to the whole economic growth of the country, and how we can anticipate this with certain actions. And second, we also show like an example from two provinces that highly depend on coal mining sector, which is also will indirectly impacted by early coal fired power plant retirement. So this kind of assessment, it's really needed for the country, not only for the government, to see more comprehensive problems or energy transition, what could be happen and how we should act in the future to address this kind of problems, and we ensure that this transition could be accelerated to achieve the climate target. Next, please. Another good example from Vietnam, which is quite different with Indonesia and Philippines, is our policy-related work is recommendatory by nature. So we provide recommendation to the government, while at the end, the government will decide how to build their policy that could be more relevant on their point of view. And one of the good example of this of the project in Vietnam is the impact of CBAM, Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, initiated by EU. So how this CBAM could affect industrial sector in Vietnam, which has to comply with international ESG standard. So the industrial sector has to decarbonize their sector by again implementing more energy efficiency or install more renewable energy. So it can be one of the realistic recommendation for the government to again assess what kind of incentive that could be provide to the stakeholders to accelerate this energy transition in the industrial sector. Next, please. And apart from our intervention in the 3 countries, we also have a regional intervention. So this is the 4 a big regional intervention. The first one is energy efficiency innovation window, which is open for proposal. We give a grant to a company, to NGOs, university that would like to share their idea on the energy efficiency. And then Energy Transition Roundtable we collaborate with Australia National University to provide capacity building related to energy transition. The other is the Diagnostic for Competitive Arrangement for Energy Transition, basically an assessment of electricity market in the region. Next, please. Again, this is just to give you a summary on what we do in the country. Next, please. So I think this is the most important part, the lesson learned and some recommendation from our experience working in the region. This is adopted from my paper together with my colleagues that you can read in the bottom part of the slide. It's about Indonesia, but I think it's related to 3 countries as well. So first, the lesson learned that we have from the region is to gaining a comprehensive understanding of transformative capacity of electricity with the specific context of developing countries. And this has to address with the conducting a very comprehensive assessment from socio-technological, political, and geostrategic in the region. The second one, we have to recognize the multifaceted impact of the transition, including the potential adverse consequences on economic development, as I explained previously. And we have to establish a transition policy framework that prioritizes inclusivity and equality, and what we usually call as a just energy transition. The last one, I think it's important and it's closely related to us, which is in the future there is substantial demand on the financial assistance and knowledge sharing mechanism, which is why we have to enhance our international collaboration across all levels, like governance, business sector, and civil society, to effectively address the challenges associated with the electricity transition. So I think that concludes my presentation today. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Edianto, for sharing all these updates in the ASEAN countries and highlighting that as we try to achieve a just energy transition, we also need to have collaborations. And I think in your last slide, it was very good. You highlighted multidisciplinary studies on energy alternatives that can meet electricity requirements of the countries, establish a policy framework that puts inclusivity and equity as guiding principles. So there are some few questions in the Q&A box, but I hope you can stay a bit for the Q&A session later before the end of the webinar. And we have learned so much, and we're not even done with the learning event just yet. For now, let's have a 10-minute health break so we can come back refreshed for our final presentation from the ADB and our Q&A discussion. So thank you and see you 4 o'clock Manila time. Afternoon to everyone back in the webinar. Again, we thank you for attending today's knowledge sharing event on air quality and climate benefits of energy policies organized by Cleaner Asia on behalf of the ADB. This is part of the South-South knowledge sharing on air quality and carbon neutrality. We invite everyone to send in their questions through the Q&A box so we can post them to our speakers later. We will have the Q&A session after our final presentation today from Mr. Ayato Kurokawa, Energy Specialist of the Asian Development Bank, who will be sharing ADB's Energy Transition Mechanism, or ETM, what it is about and how stakeholders can utilize it to accelerate their transition to clean energy. Kurokawa-san, the floor is yours. You are on mute right now.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, perfect.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. And my name is Ayato Kurokawa, and I am in charge of the Energy Transition Mechanism, or the ETM. So in the last presentation, we heard about the Energy Transition Partnership, ETP. And apologies that I'm introducing a new acronym, but here it is, the ETM.
Mr. Ayato, just
Yes.
confirming if you can kindly put it in full screen mode so our
Okay,
participants
sorry.
can see it better.
Yep. So is
Perfect.
this working
Okay.
now? Yes,
Yes,
great.
perfect. Thank
Okay.
you.
Okay, sure. Is this still in the full screen mode?
Now it went back to the non-full screen mode.
Okay, just give me a minute.
If you want, Mr. Ayato, we can also share from our end, but you can still
Yes, maybe
control.
that's probably better. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, no
Yeah.
problem at all. So while we are pulling up the slides, okay, I think in 3, 2, 1, okay. Mr. Ayato, there should be the next caret button that you can click for the next slide.
Sure, yes.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so I'll spend some time explaining what ETM is, why we need it, and where we are at in its development. But basically, ETM is a financial mechanism that blends concessional and commercial financing to reduce fossil fuel generation, particularly coal, and also expand investments in clean energy at the same time. So first of all, as a background, okay, I've tried to, okay, yes. So as a background, we like to look at the share of coal-fired generation globally. And as you can see from the chart on the left-hand side, coal has been dropping in the US and Europe in the past 10 years, but in Asia, the share of coal remains very high with limited share of renewable energy generation. And I think we've heard similar things from other speakers in this presentation, in this event. So it's imperative that we tackle the coal issue. Now, let me start with the high-level objectives. And I'm waiting for the slide to change. Okay, here we go. Yes. So if you could kindly look at the left-hand side, in the business as usual scenario, when we look at coal-fired generation represented by the brown bars, they will operate for a long time once coal-fired power plants are created. And this will have two major impacts. First is that it will generate a lot of carbon emissions while making power. And second is that it will reduce the room for clean energy to come into the power system. So what the ETM tries to do is to accelerate the early retirement of coal-fired power plants, thereby reducing emissions and also create the room for renewable energy to expand. And as you'll see in the right-hand side chart, there you have a bigger space of this, the green space. Now, what I'd like to highlight here is that ETM does not intend to shut down the coal plants immediately, but shorten their operational life. So this will give time for investments in power grid and also renewable energy to grow. And it would also allow deployment of just transition activities, ensuring that the people and communities that depend on coal generation, on coal industry, are presented with other opportunities for their livelihood. So I'd like to just briefly touch upon the 4 Ps of ADB's approach when we talk about the ETM, the 4 Ps of people, policy, and power, and partnership. And particularly, let me touch upon people and policy. So when we do the ETM, so obviously this is about the power sector, and we have to do this, together with other stakeholders. But one thing that we do want to emphasize is that supporting the just transition, as I mentioned, is very critical, and it's very important when we do the ETM mechanism. And also, this is not just about individual transactions of retiring or repurposing coal plants, but it also has to be done together with effective reforms in terms of policies and also in the energy sector. So these are the things that ADB is already doing, and we will do the ETM activities together with the policy work that we've been doing, and also on the just transition work. Now, here is an overview of the energy transition mechanism, or the ETM. As mentioned, the ETM's objective is twofold, and first is to accelerate the retirement or repurposing of coal-fired power plants, and second is to scale up investments in clean energy. So the 2 icons that you see on the right-hand side. Now, the critical component for the success of ETM is grants and highly concessional funds that are needed to finance these activities. And while we're looking at the range of options, the ETM Partnership Trust Fund, the blue box that you see on the left bottom side, is expected to be one of the main providers of this concessional funding. Now, there are other sources of concessional funding, such as the climate investment funds accelerating accelerating coal transition, or the CIF ACT. So that would be under this gray box at the middle. And these grants or concessional funds can be deployed through several channels. So the first is the ETM funding vehicle, which is something that I will explain a bit later. And it's a specific funding vehicle that would focus on ETM activities. Second is obviously the ADB's normal direct transactions. So the concessional funding can come together with ADB financing. And thirdly are the technical assistances. So just a bit of background on the history of ETM. So we launched the energy transition mechanism together with the governments of Indonesia and Philippines in 2021 at the COP26 in Glasgow. And here, the government of Japan has announced to contribute 25 million for grant to be used for ETM, and this money has already come into the ETM Partnership Trust Fund. In 2022, we saw a lot of activities and progress, especially in Indonesia. as they were the G20 chair. I'll just mention a couple of things. One is the launch of the Indonesia ETM country platform, and also the announcement of an MOU of the first private sector IPP plant in Indonesia, announcing to start the process of potential retirement. So that was for the Cirebon 660 megawatt plant in West Java. Also in 2022 at the COP, Germany has also kindly announced to contribute a further 30 million euros to the ETM Trust Fund, and those would be used for our activities. So ADB is currently undertaking a feasibility study on the ETM, particularly in Indonesia and Philippines. So what do we do under the feasibility studies? I've put here 4 items, and they don't necessarily happen in sequence. But first of all, we have to do the project selection, which looks at the specific plans, but also the power system to ensure that any retirement will not negatively impact the stable supply of electricity. Second is the structuring of specific transaction of these coal plants selected. That includes the financial analysis, the commercial viability, as well as looking into some of the legal or the regulatory aspects. And I'll spend a few slides explaining this a bit more. Third is the funding vehicle structuring of the ETM facility. And this will bring in different types of concessional capital and private sector capital that will do multiple transactions for the accelerated retirement, as well as the investments in clean energy. And last but not the least, work on environmental, social, and governance aspects that are very important, as I've mentioned. So let me then talk about some of the transaction models that we are considering under ETM. So there are 3 that I've listed here, but the first one, the acquisition model, where the ETM fund acquires the coal-fired power plants, is not something that we are actively considering right now. And our main focus would be on the second and the third one. This is the synthetic model and the portfolio model. So in the synthetic model, the equity ownership and the operational responsibility would be kept with the current coal-fired power plant owner. And in this model, the ETM would re-leverage the coal plant with low-cost capital, allowing it to be retired early. And there will be more explanation on this in the following slides. The third one, the portfolio model, this is basically a corporate lending or a corporate finance structure, for example, to a state-owned utility like PLN or EVN, and it could potentially be supported through a sustainability-linked loan. So a bit more explanation on the synthetic model. Now, earlier, when I spoke about some of the achievements in 2022 in Indonesia, I mentioned the Cirebon project. And so this is the Cirebon project is more or less based on this structure, I would say. So here, I would like to highlight that the project company, the yellow box in the middle, would repay existing debt and replace a portion of the equity thanks to the low-cost debt coming from the ETM funding. And to explain this from a cash flow perspective, if you see the business as usual on the top side, on the upper side, The project will be repaying the debt for another 6 years, represented by the orange bars, and will be paying equity return as shown in the blue bars for the next 20 years. Now, when there's the ETM intervention on the lower side, a low-cost loan will be provided, represented by the long green bar in year 0. Now, this would allow, firstly, to repay the existing debt, and secondly, to offer a special dividend upfront to the existing owners based on the net present value of the plant. Now, in this example, the coal plant is able to wind down 7 years earlier than the term in the power purchase agreement. And as you can see, this model works because the ETM lending rate is lower than the return on equity and lower than the existing debt, enabling the revenues of the plan to continue pay the equity holders and refinance debt from the ETM, but in a much shorter period than the business as usual scenario. So this would be the how the cash flow would work in a synthetic model under the ETM. Now, I will not go into too much details for the portfolio model, but as I said, this is basically a corporate lending structure, which can probably be used for state-owned utilities or large conglomerates having multiple coal-fired power plants, say, for example, in the Philippines. So the third item that I mentioned under the feasibility study is the funding vehicle. So the energy transition mechanism requires a lot of funding, and this is not something that ADB alone can finance in its entirety. So one of the ideas that we are having is to establish a specific, a separate funding vehicle outside of the ADB system, which will finance both the fossil fuel plant side and also the clean energy side. The work is going on to establish this. Now, it has taken a bit more time than we originally expected, but hopefully we would be able to establish this, launch the funding vehicle in next year in 2024. The last item on the feasibility study that I mentioned is a commitment to safeguards and just transition. Now, I think our attention tends to gravitate around the structuring and the techno-financial side of ETM. Environmental, social, and governance aspects are strongly integrated in the study as well. So as you can see on the slide, a regional strategic environment and social assessment, or SESA, scoping study was completed last year. The report is already available in the ADB website, and country level SESA for Indonesia and SESA scoping study for Philippines is already ongoing. Another quick word on, a word on just transition. I think this was also mentioned by the last speaker, that the impact assessment on the retirement of coal or the coal industry has to be taken very seriously. There are thousands of people who depend on this on the industry, and it has to be taken, and how ADB approaches is that we don't just look at the asset level, but we also look at the community level, the national level, and the regional level. Now, lastly, I think this is going to be the last slide. Just wanted to highlight some of the progress that we have made so far. So similar to the ETP, our main focus countries are Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam. We are expanding to some other countries like Kazakhstan, where we are currently conducting feasibility study. But still, the main focus is on these three countries. So in Indonesia, as I mentioned, we have signed the MOU to do a to conduct the first private sector IPP transaction. We have also received approval for a 500 million concessional funding from the CIF Act program. And as I mentioned, we are working on the policy side as well. So we're working on a policy-based lending, hopefully that we can approve this year. There are also ongoing activities on CESA and the engagement with the CSO and NGO committees is ongoing. So that was on Indonesia. In the Philippines, our main work is around also the CIF Act, the Climate Investment Fund's Accelerating Coal Transition Program. We are currently aiming to submit an investment plan for the Philippines towards the end of this year. And basically what we're doing is to develop the pipeline for this submission. Vietnam was a little bit delayed, but with the recent approval of their Power Development number 8, and with their really aggressive commitments to net zero, I think now is a good time to really ramp up the work in Vietnam, and we hope to start the full feasibility study on ETM in Vietnam, hopefully by the end of this year or early next year. So I hope I haven't gone over time, and I'll stop here and happy to answer any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ayato, for that presentation. Indeed, it's very helpful for the participants to have an understanding of how the ADB is putting into action the energy transition plans of the institution. And with that, we would actually like to call back into the virtual podium all of our speakers from Dr. Wei-Wan. We also have, of course, Mr. Achmed. We also have, of course, Mr. Ayato. Okay, and now I will start with the questions posed in our Q&A box. And the very first one is addressed for Dr. Wei-Wan, and I think it's also, of course, very interesting to note how, given the success of the PRC in addressing both the economic growth and the air pollution improvement in the country, one of the key questions here is that how did the PRC enforce the strict policies, especially on the coal-fired power plants and the energy sector, given that it also touches on energy security? So I think a lot of Asian countries can relate to the response to this question. Go ahead, Dr. Wei.
I think the first question is very big and challenging one. So I will come up with the easy one about the energy. I think energy security is also a priority for China. The discussion concern never goes away. And the government and sector have been trying very hard to find a balance of the green transition and energy security. The adjustment of the role of coal power plants, which is a domain role before of China, how to create the new role for power plants is very important, and also a big challenge facing by the energy sector. In the context of carbon neutrality and energy restructuring, the power plants have gradually transformed from being the main power generators to new roles of providing energy flexibility and guarantee the safety. These coal power plants are facing challenges, of course. The transition is not that smooth. Firstly, the coal price have risen significantly in recent years, while the electricity prices have remained basically the same in China. This is different from other countries. We've kind of fixed the price of electricity, meaning that the large financial burdens or even losses for the power plants. Second challenge will be that they cannot generate power at full capacity to meet the flexible requirements and give the space for more renewable energies. And many power plants even generate less than half and even 40% of their design capacity. It's a big issue now, which can result in significant efficiency losses for power plants originally designed and built with the goal of generating at full capacity. Therefore, many coal power plants are also put great effort to improve energy efficiency, actively transforming to and seeking a way out, including the cogeneration of electricity and heating, and investment in new energy units and so on. So that's the response to the second question. And for the first one, I think it's really a very big question. I think the cost-effective choice and science-based solutions will be the best choice for countries, but it's still quite big. If we take the angle that's most relevant to today's topic, energy, I think it is necessary to highlight that many Asian countries are also in the process of energy transition, like I shared to respond to the other question. Based on China's experience, on the one hand, the incentive policies are very important to encourage investment, research, and development, and to establish the energy system or grid system that adapted to renewable energy in order to actively promote the development of renewable energy. Secondly, it is also very important to take advantage of technology development happened globally. Thermal power generation should be as clean and as flexible as possible, not like the plans that we, or choice that we may make 10 years ago. This is in order to adapt to the needs of a cleaner energy sector, and what needs to be avoided is the waste of investment. The large scale and disorderly construction of new thermal power, the coal power plants and oil thermal power plants, which may last for decades, but somehow need to phase out in the middle of their lifetime circle. So this will cause the waste and locking effects of high emission.
Thank you very much, Wei, for that. I think it was really important to highlight that what we want to do is to make sure that the investments are worth it. So, you know, our goals of clean air and clean energy is actually not just for the sake of the environment and the people, but also of the industry itself, because it's them also investing money on their facilities. So thank you very much, Wei, for that. I think similar to the approach that you did, what I will do is to read all the questions first, and then I think so that there would be continuous answering of questions. We now proceed to Dr. Achmed Edianto for questions, as you can see in the Q&A box. So people are very curious. Aside from the Vietnam, Indonesia, and Philippines, or what we call them in Cleaner Asia, VIP countries, will there be coverage or focus on other ASEAN countries? The other one would be, how does the ETP approach and ensure inclusivity and equity in the context of possible changes in employment? Because you mentioned in your slide, there would be changes in employment because we're shifting towards non-coal work. So would there be in UNOPS, do you also analyze, mapping alternatives for people employed in the industry? And the last question would be, could you share more about the energy efficiency grants? Can cities apply as well? And how much is the typical size of the grant? I think people are very interested on the implementation side. So go ahead, Dr. Achmed.
Thank you, Everlyn. So for the first question, our coverage in Southeast Asia, well, actually, there are some countries who already expressed their interest to have ETP support. While, of course, we don't have any directive yet as of now, but we want this energy transition to be inclusive for all countries, especially in Southeast Asia regions. So we are open for any opportunity, and we are communicating with other countries as well. And as I mentioned in my previous slides, we also work on the APGP, which is ASEAN Power Grid interconnectivity that mentioned by Dr. Zhu as well, which includes other area outside the three countries, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Philippines. So the possibility is there. For the second question about the approach to ensure the inclusivity and equity, we have a project, a regional program called Just Coal Transition Platform. It was initiated by Energy Transition Partnership ETP Regional Office together with World Bank. And we expected to have more support. We also tried to coordinate with ADB. And I think it can answer the other question, how ETP and ETM work together in Indonesia, especially and other country, I believe in Vietnam and Philippines. We always try to share our projects with the development partners, as well as like ADB, World Bank. Because if you remember one of my slides, I discussed about the PLN Improved Control Center for the grids. It's also closely collaborated with ADB and World Bank based on the RBL project. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Ayato. It was a result-based loan, if I'm not mistaken. So it was, it's one of the main mandate of the ETP to coordinate with all of the development partners in all regions, so we can avoid any redundancy in other works, and we can fill the gap, work closely together to solve these energy transition problems. And for the last question about the EEIW, well, again, we can say that anyone can send their proposal as long as this proposal aims to address barriers to energy efficiency implementation. So that was the big idea. There are currently 3 ongoing on ESCOs and investment grade audits projects. The last round, the 4th one, has just closed, unfortunately, last January. But please stay tuned in ETP's website and LinkedIn page for the call, for the next round. So we will be happy to receive all of the innovative idea about energy efficiency. I think that's all from my side. Back to you, Ever. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Achmed. It's in that regard, actually, there are some follow-up questions asking how they can be involved, how can they get in touch. So I guess it's just like you've mentioned, you stay tuned in your website, and then you're free to contact and send emails. Another follow-up question before we proceed to the ETM discussions would be, there's a question on, does the UNOPS ETP also include integrated resource planning for the country so that we ensure that while they transition, the energy demands of the country are still met?
Yeah, that's a good question. Before I answer that question, I think I forgot to explain more about the Just Coal Transition Platform. So let me get back to that first and then answer the following question. So the Just Coal Transition Platform is a regional program to ensure the fairness, the just aspect on the coal transition. Again, as I mentioned, this is initiated by EDB and World Bank, and then we also asked another development partner, ADB, to join this movement. We are now currently developing a framework for this just transition platform, and it will be more on the stakeholder engagement, will be involved in the transition process, especially in the coal industries. So for that question, let me find the question. Integrated is a root cause. Okay, this is a good question, actually. Again, it depends on the needs for the government, but one of the projects that we mentioned in our slides in Indonesia, for example, we have this kind of project to develop a energy planning integrated with spatial plan, which is, the idea was to link all of this aspect that not only on the forecasting on the supply and demand, but also a real situation in the site level. So this will provide more comprehensive information while when the government try to develop a new greenfield area for renewable energy development, for example, as well as to develop or to help the regional government to think on how to integrate all of their regional planning to be able to comply with the national target as well. So I hope that answered the question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Achmed. Indeed, that is very helpful. That the key point that we're trying to highlight here is that energy plans should actually be integrated not only with energy decisions, but with other decisions and priorities of the country as well. So thank you very much. We now move on to the ETM questions, Mr. Ayato. I would just read through. There are several questions on the ETM, and the first question would be on what are the considerations for the DMCs or the countries to participate or be a beneficiary of ETM projects? The next one would be, how does the ADB assess the potential environmental and social impacts of the energy transition projects before providing support? It's also a curiosity here. How does the ADB engage with private sector partners and other stakeholders to drive this initiative? So basically, how can the other sectors also play a role? And then, very important will be, what are the key challenges so far that the ETM implementation has encountered?
Sure. Thank you for these questions. All very good questions. So first of all, on the question on the considerations for DMCs to participate or to become a beneficiary of the ETM program, I guess we could think of many things, but I think the most important thing is for the developing member country to show and to express commitment for energy transition. There are no country in this world, including developed countries, which has a perfect energy transition roadmap. No country has that. But ADB is here to assist this, assist in building this roadmap. So I think it's important for the country to have some commitment towards this path. Now, that could be a net zero target or a moratorium on new coal plants. It could be a target year for peaking. And then I think we can build on from that, for both on the policy regulatory side and also on the individual transaction side. Now, on the next question on what was the next question? Yes, the environmental and social impacts. So how does ADB assess these potential environmental social impacts? So I hope I'm answering this question, but so as I tried to explain in my presentation, we do conduct a just transition scoping study, also the CESA studies, which we have conducted or ongoing in Indonesia and also in the Philippines. So we'll have the kind of the national level scoping study, and then once we have the actual individual projects, we will have these assessments for each transaction. So I think that would be the short answer for that. And then another question was, how does ADB engage with private sector partners and other stakeholders to drive energy transition initiatives? Good question, but not easy one to answer. So again, I think this will be on approach twofold. So first of all, one way is of course where ADB works with the national government to make sure that there are the right incentives and the right policies are in place so that the private sector are more incentivized to move towards cleaner energy. And the second way how we approach this is that we work with individual private sector companies. Now, a lot of these are commercial transactions, and where we are not able to name names, but we are working with private sector IPPs in several countries that are interested in retiring or repurposing their coal fleet earlier than scheduled. Thirdly, the challenges. Very good question. So maybe I'll just mention two things. So as we start really working into getting into the details, this work on ETM, to be honest, is very difficult. And I guess at the root of it is the balancing of the decarbonization needs and the energy security. Coal is, fortunately or unfortunately, in many countries is still a very relatively cheap and reliable source of energy. And in this region in Southeast Asia and many developing Asian countries, energy demand is growing very rapidly. And so it is not also from a political perspective, just abandoning this source of energy is not immediately is not very realistic. So how to balance the energy security issue and the decarbonization ultimately is a very difficult challenge. Now, if I were to just mention one other challenge, kind of a narrow, sort of a technical narrow issue, but the current interest rate environment is not so favorable for ETM to work. So as I mentioned in my presentation, we try to provide low interest funding, but with the interest rates going higher, it is becoming a little bit challenging to provide these low interest loans. So I'll pause here. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Mr. Ayato. I think in relation to what was raised already by Mr. Achmed, there was a question as well on how the ETM and ETP is working together.
Yeah, so Dr. Ahmed can supplement, but so we are working with ETP, and as I focus more on Philippines and Vietnam, we've been working together in the Philippines. So and this is actually not just with ETP, but collaboration with different partners is critical in this in this massive work that we need to do for energy transition. And we have this regular meetings where all the development partners come together and discuss the energy transition in the Philippines. ETP and ADB, we are and have been like chairs in the working groups in this regular meeting. So yes, we do certainly work together for this cause.
Just checking with Dr. Achmed if you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, I have explained basically in my explanation, my answer to the question. So yeah, it's our main mandate from the donors, from the government and philanthropies, to coordinate with all development partners in the regions, especially in the country level. So for Indonesia, as I explained previously, all of our projects, before we start, we have to share it with our counterparts, like our partners, not only the government, but also like ADB, World Bank, existing development partners like from Germany, UK, because again, this energy transition efforts need more collaboration. So the way we collaborate is to coordinate by, build a communication, and with this good coordination communication, we can address these problems effectively and more rapidly, I think. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Achmed. I guess on behalf of Cleaner Asia, what the participants can also anticipate is that we will continue to combine and to collate all these best practices and efforts of different institutions, especially as we help also the government partners to keep track of their progress towards the same goal. Dr. Wei has already shared the link as well to the full report that she presented, and we will share, of course, the slides to the presentation after the webinar. So it has been truly an enlightening and productive discussion. We would like to thank all our speakers, including Dr. Zulfikar, for sharing their time and expertise for the event, as well as our participants who have been very active in the Q&A. To formally close the event, may we call on Ms. Karma Yangzom, Principal Environment Specialist in the Safeguards Review Division in the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department of ADB, for her closing remarks. Karma?
Thank you, Ever, and thank you so much to all our speakers, presenters, for these very rich discussion. And thank you to our audience, which has shrunk a bit, but then still they've kept the Q&A chat box quite busy. So thank you for all the very good questions from the audience. I think today's discussion is a very important one, especially because energy sector is a huge source of greenhouse gas emissions as well as air pollution. So over the course of the session today, we first heard from Dr. Zulfikar about the increasing trend of renewable energy in the ASEAN region. And I think this is also increasing in other parts of Asia and the Pacific. And we learned about the LTMS multilateral trade agreement. So a lot of promising developments there. However, we've also learned that there are still some gaps between the targets that have been set and the policy framework, and also the financing in what needs to be done in order to meet the targets. And we also heard this figure of $3 trillion that will be needed only from the energy sector to meet the 1.5 degree target under the Paris Agreement. And I think he mentioned something around $8 to $9 trillion dollars needed from all other sectors to meet the 1.5 degree target. So there are still a lot of big financing gaps to be filled. So we all really need to work hard together to work on scaling up financing in the energy sector and all other sectors as well. And we also heard about the success story of Vietnam, where there was a rapid increase in the renewable energy market and the government's role in creating and enabling environment through policies which supported and incentivize the private sector. Then from Ever, we learned about the very comprehensive guidance framework that Clean Air Asia has prepared towards moving towards clean air and clean energy in Asia, and focusing on decarbonizing coal-fired power plants and other heavy polluting industries and transitioning to renewable energy. So I thought that the step-by-step guidance framework was quite comprehensive and a good guide for our countries in Asia. From Wei in Clean Air Asia PRC, we also learned a lot, and what really struck me was the graph that you showed, where there was the different, the WHO 2021 standards, and then the national standards, and then the yellow dot, which showed where the country's air pollution status is. And, there's like such a big gap, except for PRC, which is always such an inspiring story to hear about the success in PRC in tackling air pollution, and also proving that it is possible to decouple development with pollution. And the graph showing how there is an increase in consumption of energy, increase in number of vehicles, but at the same time there is a decrease in PM 2.5 levels. So that's always such an inspiring story to hear about PRC. From Dr. Achmed from UNOPS, we heard a lot about the ETP, very interesting. And I think one point that I gathered is that in Vietnam, though there is the success story, but then there is also still the challenge on the grid capacity. So while there is a lot of renewable energy generation, we also need to work on upgrading and expanding the grid capacity to distribute the energy. And we also learned about the big announcements that were made last year in Indonesia. As Ever said, the VIP countries, so basically Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines. And I think there were some big numbers that were mentioned, where the plan is for Vietnam to reach a peak of no more than 170 metric tons of CO2 equivalent from electricity generation by 2030, and sort of similar figures mentioned for I think the Philippines as well. But I was thinking it would also be interesting to understand in in quantitative terms also what it would mean in terms of reduction of air pollution. Finally, we heard from Ayato from ADB, our colleague from ADB, on the energy transition mechanism and ADB's efforts to have this sort of creative financing platform, which is quite unique and different from ADB's traditional, normal financing instruments, which is focused on enabling the early retirement of coal-fired power plants and accelerating renewable energy. So all in all, very, very rich and informative discussions. And the overarching takeaway that I got is that there is a rapid shift towards renewable energy. And as we all know, there are so many countries that have made commitments to reach net zero. So there is a lot of focus towards phasing down of coal-fired power plants. And there are many initiatives ongoing, ETP, ETM, that we heard about today, but there are still a lot of challenges. And as Ayato mentioned, the key challenge of, balancing the energy security and at the same time, still working towards decarbonization. So this is a very, sort of fine balancing act that needs to be made. And but at the same time, I think what is again inspiring is again the story from China, that it is possible to have development and a continued increase in energy consumption, but at the same time achieve a reduction in emissions of both greenhouse gases and air pollutants. So I really look forward to continue the discussion, particularly under the energy sector. and looking at opportunities to, I think, from the discussions today, I felt that the emphasis was a bit more on, carbon emission reduction and greenhouse gas emission reduction. But then along with, there is a lot of air pollution reduction as well. So I think we could talk more and find ways to better bring in the air pollution reduction element into these discussions. So with that, thank you very much, everybody. And thank you, Ever, again, as usual, for your excellent moderation. And to all our speakers for your very informative presentations, and to all the participants for hanging on for 3 hours now. Thank you very much. Over to you, Ever.
Thank you so much, Karma. To our participants, again, thank you very much. We have put in the chat box a link to a short survey form about the event, and for you to let us know if you would like an online certificate for attending this session. So thank you once again to everyone. For our panelists and hosts, we would like to request for a group photo so that we can also document this very, very enlightening knowledge sharing event. So just waiting for the rest. I think the rest of the team, if you want to also join in the group photo. Okay, so now I will take the screenshot. So okay, if you'd like to join. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, for good measure, we can also take another one just to be sure. So 1, 2, 3. There. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Wade. Thank you so much, Dr. Achmed, Dr. Ayato, Karma, and of course, Ms. Gins. Thank you, everyone, to the whole Clean Air Asia team as well. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.